Have you ever stood in front of a house so strange, so impossibly twisted, that it felt alive? Imagine walking through endless corridors that lead to nothing, staircases climbing into ceilings, and doors that open into brick walls. Now imagine this. The woman who built it believed she was being hunted by the dead thousands of restless spirits demanding her atonement. This isn't fiction. This is the story of Sarah Winchester and the most haunted mansion in America. It begins with tragedy. Sarah was the wife of William Wirt Winchester, heir to the Winchester Repeating Arms Company, the company whose rifles had spilled more blood than any other weapon of the 19th century. The repeating rifle was called the gun that won the West, but it also left behind countless graves, unmarked and forgotten. Soldiers, outlaws, Native Americans, and innocents caught in the crossfire, all silenced by the rifle that bore the Winchester name. In 1881, Sarah's husband died suddenly of tuberculosis, leaving her alone and shattered. Only a few years earlier, she had lost her infant daughter, Annie, to illness. Sarah's grief was bottomless, but it was what came after that sealed her fate. Desperate for answers, she sought out a spiritual medium, one of the many who claimed they could speak with the dead. In a dimly lit parlor, the medium whispered the truth Sarah dreaded to hear. She was cursed. The restless souls of those killed by Winchester rifles were clawing at her, crying for vengeance. Unless she built them a home, a place to wander, a labyrinth to confuse them, they would come for her. The medium gave her one command: move west and never stop building. As long as you build, you will live. If you stop, you will die. Sarah took the warning seriously. With her vast inheritance, over $20 million at the time, an unimaginable fortune, she traveled to California and bought a modest farmhouse near San Jose, but she didn't stop there. Day and night, the sound of hammers echoed across the land. Crews of workers labored in shifts, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Sarah never gave them plans. She claimed to be guided by the spirits themselves, sketching bizarre designs on scraps of paper and demanding they be built immediately. What rose from that simple farmhouse was no ordinary mansion. It grew into a sprawling labyrinth of more than 160 rooms, twisting hallways and endless staircases. Some stairs climbed 7 flights, only to end abruptly at a solid ceiling. Doors opened into walls. Windows looked into other rooms instead of outside. There were rooms within rooms, hidden passageways, and secret spy holes where Sarah could watch her servants without being seen. The workers didn't question her, not openly, but they whispered among themselves. They said Sarah wore a black veil at all times, wandering the corridors like a shadow. They said she never slept in the same room twice, moving from chamber to chamber each night so the spirits could never find her. Every midnight, a bell was rung, summoning the ghosts to the seance room, a hidden chamber where Sarah would sit alone at a round table, waiting to receive instructions. Neighbors spoke of lights flickering at strange hours, of phantom figures passing behind the stained glass windows. Deliverymen reported knocking at the gates, only for the gates to swing open by themselves. Visitors claimed to hear footsteps in empty hallways and the hammering of construction even when the workers had all gone home. But Sarah never stopped. For nearly 38 years, she poured her fortune into the house. Room after room, staircase after staircase. Some said it was madness, others said it was guilt. But those who believed the stories knew the truth. The house itself was a trap, a sprawling cage designed to hold the dead. And yet, the dead found their way in. Workers often refused to enter certain rooms. One carpenter claimed he saw a man with hollow eyes watching him from the corner, but when he turned, the figure was gone. Another swore he felt a hand grip his shoulder, icy and strong, even though no one was there. A maid once fainted after seeing a soldier, blood pouring from his chest, stumbling through the corridor before vanishing into the wall. Sarah never denied these stories. In fact, she confessed to a visitor that the spirits were always near. She spoke of the ones she had seen herself, a cowboy missing half his face, a child clutching a bullet wound in her stomach, a native warrior who appeared at her bedside whispering words she couldn't understand. Each of them, she believed, had come to remind her why she must continue building. Years passed. The house grew stranger. Towering to 7 stories before an earthquake reduced it, the mansion twisted and sprawled over acres, a place where even the living could lose themselves forever. People who visited spoke of time bending inside those walls, as if the house had no beginning, no end. And Sarah? She wandered its halls, a prisoner in the very fortress she had built. She grew old, but she never stopped listening to the whispers in the dark, because she knew the moment the hammers fell silent, her life would end. By the turn of the century, the Winchester mansion had become a thing of legend. Locals called it a house built by madness, a never-ending maze where even daylight seemed to struggle. The neighbors rarely saw Sarah, and when they did, it was only the faintest glimpse, a veiled widow drifting across the gardens like a shadow, moving between rooms that seemed to multiply by the week. But those who worked inside knew the truth. Sarah wasn't just building a house, she was feeding it. Every night, at the stroke of midnight, the mansion came alive. The servants said they could hear footsteps where no one walked, whispers that carried through the pipes, and doors slamming on their own. The seance room, locked from all sides except one, was where Sarah performed her midnight ritual. A round table, a single candle, and the infamous planchette board. She would sit there, silent for hours, her hands trembling as though someone else were guiding them. When morning came, fresh blueprints would appear, bizarre sketches scribbled in her hand. A staircase here, a hallway there. Some designs made no sense. A door that led nowhere, a corridor that circled back on itself. But the carpenters followed her orders. None dared to ask why. One worker, a young man named Daniel, couldn't resist his curiosity. One night he lingered near the seance room, pressing his ear to the door. Inside, he heard voices, many voices. Some whispered, some screamed, others moaned in agony. But Sarah's voice was never among them. It was as if she were only listening. Terrified, Daniel quit the next day. He told others he would rather starve than spend another night in that house. The spirits were not confined to the seance room. Guests who stayed overnight told stories of ghostly encounters that left them trembling. One woman woke to the sound of children giggling, only to see tiny handprints appear in the dust at the foot of her bed. Another man claimed he saw an old soldier limping down the hallway, dragging a broken leg. When he followed, the figure turned the corner and vanished into a wall. Even Sarah admitted the hauntings were real. She spoke freely to trusted visitors, saying the house was filled with the dead soldiers, outlaws, women and children, even innocents killed by stray bullets. Each of them, she claimed, found their way to the mansion. "They come for me," she whispered once to a journalist, "but I must confuse them. I must keep them wandering." That was why the staircases twisted endlessly, why doors opened into walls. Every strange design was meant to mislead the spirits, to turn them away from Sarah's chambers. And still the spirits prowled. The earthquake of 1906 nearly destroyed the mansion. Entire wings collapsed and 7 stories crumbled to 4. Sarah was trapped in her bedroom for hours before servants broke her free. Locals whispered it wasn't just nature that shook the house, it was the dead, furious that their labyrinth had been disturbed. Sarah agreed. She ordered many of the rooms sealed, claiming they had become too active. Entire sections of the mansion were locked forever, their windows nailed shut, their doors barred. Workers said they heard things inside, scratching, knocking, and sometimes faint screams. But no one dared open them again. Despite the destruction, Sarah rebuilt. The hammers never stopped. Day and night, The mansion groaned under the weight of new additions. Passageways doubled back on themselves, staircases ended in drops, and mirrors were placed in odd corners. Sarah said they were to confuse the spirits that stalked her. She lived like a ghost herself, drifting silently through the endless halls, carrying keys to more than 100 locked doors. But there were moments, brief and terrifying, when Sarah seemed to lose her composure. A servant recalled finding her in the grand ballroom, kneeling on the floor and sobbing. She said she had seen them again, the faces of children, lined up in silence, each with a bullet wound across the chest. Another time, she claimed a cowboy with a shattered skull had followed her into the garden, whispering, "This is your doing." She fainted before she could finish telling the story, and yet she kept building. The house had grown to such vast proportions that visitors became lost for hours. Guests would turn a corner and find themselves trapped in circles, passing the same door over and over. A few even claimed the house itself was shifting around them, as if the walls moved when no one was looking. A maid, too terrified to stay, once told neighbors that Sarah never truly slept. She would rest for only a few minutes at a time before bolting awake, her face pale with terror. "They're here," she would mutter, clutching her candle. "We must keep moving." Rumors spread that Sarah believed her very heartbeat was tied to the pounding of hammers. As long as construction continued, she would live. But if the tools ever fell silent, so would she. So the house grew. Larger, stranger, darker. A monument not of wealth, but of fear. And those who dared to enter its halls at night swore they could hear them, the spirits that Sarah feared most, whispering her name, waiting for her to stop building. By 1910, the mansion had become a prison of wood and shadow, stretching across 6 acres of twisting rooms and endless corridors. Few dared to enter its halls after dark. Workers refused to stay overnight, and even the bravest servants begged to leave before sunset. They whispered that the house was no longer just haunted, it was alive. The spirits had grown bolder. At night, Sarah could hear them moving through the walls, dragging footsteps that scraped across the floorboards. Doors rattled without wind. Lights flickered, though no storm raged outside. The house pulsed with an energy, as if the dead were testing the barriers she had built for them. One autumn evening, a visitor named Henry, a friend of a carpenter, asked to see the infamous mansion for himself. Sarah reluctantly allowed him to walk the halls, provided he never strayed alone, but curiosity outweighed caution. While the others worked, Henry slipped away into the sealed east wing, the very section Sarah had locked after the great earthquake. He never came back the same. When the workers found him hours later, he was crouched in the dust, trembling. His clothes were torn as if he had clawed at them himself, and his eyes were wide, staring into nothing. All he could mutter was, "They're still in there?" They never left. He left the house that night and was never seen in San Jose again. The servants knew exactly what he had seen. That wing was where dozens had died during the quake, crushed beneath collapsing floors and beams. Sarah claimed their spirits had been trapped ever since. That was why she sealed the doors, why she never allowed anyone to enter. But even outside the sealed rooms, the dead roamed freely. A butler once saw a woman in white gliding down the grand staircase. She was silent, her head bowed, her feet not touching the steps. When he called out to her, she vanished into the air. Another servant claimed he was followed by the sound of boots marching behind him, heavy military steps, each one echoing louder until he turned and saw no one there. Sarah herself was not spared. She confessed to her closest maid, Henrietta, that she often woke to see shadowy figures standing at the foot of her bed. Some nights they whispered, other nights they screamed. One morning, Henrietta found Sarah sitting rigid in her chair, clutching a candle, her lips quivering. When Henrietta asked what had happened, Sarah's reply was chilling. "They found me last night. They knew which room I was in. That was why Sarah never slept in the same chamber twice. Every evening, she carried her candle down the twisting hallways, unlocking a different room for her restless slumber. She believed if she stayed too long in one place, the spirits would finally claim her. The mansion itself seemed to shift beneath her paranoia. Doors that once opened easily now stuck, as if invisible hands pressed them shut. Windows slammed without warning, shattering into shards. Mirrors cracked in their frames. Workers swore they heard Sarah's name whispered when she wasn't present, carried through the walls by a voice that wasn't human. Yet Sarah refused to stop. She ordered more staircases, more hidden rooms, more labyrinthine hallways. She built doors that opened into sheer drops, staircases that spiraled into ceilings, cupboards that concealed crawl spaces. She said the spirits were growing cleverer, that the only way to keep them lost was to stay ahead of them. But the more she built, the louder the spirits became. On one stormy night, Henrietta accompanied Sarah to the seance room. A candlelight flickered as Sarah laid her hands on the table. For nearly an hour she sat motionless, her lips trembling as if she were listening to voices no one else could hear. Then slowly her head tilted back. In a voice not her own, low and guttural, she whispered, "We are many, and we are waiting." Henrietta fled in terror and refused to return. The next day, new blueprints appeared on Sarah's desk, scribbled in a shaking hand. They weren't rooms. They weren't stairs. They were cages, iron bars, and locked chambers. She told the workers to build them immediately. When asked why, she answered simply, "They want out. And if they get out, we will all suffer." The cages were never completed. Workers quit in fear, abandoning their tools. Sarah wandered the unfinished corridors, muttering that the spirits were slipping through, that they were stronger now than ever before. Those who passed by the house at night swore they heard screams echoing from inside, anguished cries that rose above the hammering of tools. Some claimed to see faces at the windows, hollow-eyed and pale, staring down at the street below. And Sarah? She grew frailer, her health wasting away as if the mansion itself was draining her. But still, the construction continued. Because Sarah Winchester knew one thing above all else. If the building ever stopped, the dead would finally claim their prize. By the early 1920s, the Winchester mansion was no longer a house. It was a labyrinth of grief, a fortress of fear, and a prison of spirits. For nearly 4 decades, Sarah Winchester had not stopped building. The sound of hammers and saws echoed day and night, as though the house itself was alive and hungry. But Sarah was fading. Her body grew weak, her steps slower, her veil heavier upon her shoulders. The servant said her eyes looked haunted, as if she were already halfway in the grave. And yet, even in her frailty, she continued the nightly rituals. Every midnight, the bell rang, summoning the spirits. Sarah entered the seance room alone, shutting the door behind her. Some nights she emerged pale and trembling, whispering new instructions for construction. Other nights she would not emerge until dawn, her lips blue, her hands trembling. Once, a maid found her collapsed on the table, and when they revived her, Sarah gasped, "They're closer now. They can see me." The house grew stranger with each passing year. Entire wings stood abandoned, their doors nailed shut. In the gardens, visitors claimed to see shadows moving across the windows, even when Sarah was the only one inside. Deliverymen left packages at the gate, too afraid to step onto the property. Locals said the mansion had become a beacon for the restless dead, a place where lost souls gathered, trapped within the twisting maze. And then, on September 5th, 1922, the hammers fell silent. Sarah had gone to bed in one of her countless rooms, a candle flickering by her side. The servant said she seemed unsettled that evening, her eyes darting toward the dark corners of the room as if someone or something waited there. She muttered to herself before falling asleep, "I can't build fast enough." That night, she never woke. The workers were stunned. For the first time in nearly 40 years, their tools were set down. The endless noise of sawing and hammering ceased, and with it, the house grew quiet. Too quiet. The servants said that in the silence, they could hear the whispers more clearly than ever before. Sarah's death left behind not only her fortune, but the most terrifying house in America. Her relatives refused to live there. Many wouldn't even enter. The house was sold, its endless corridors and secret chambers abandoned. Visitors who came to explore reported strange occurrences almost immediately. Doors that refused to open suddenly slammed shut behind them. Cold spots lingered in empty hallways. The sound of footsteps echoed on the upper floors, even when no one was there. And then there was the bell. Though it had not been rung since Sarah's death, neighbors swore they heard it tolling at midnight, faint and distant, as if someone or something still called the spirits together. The new owners attempted to map the mansion but failed. The layout made no sense. Staircases led to ceilings. Doors opened into empty air. Some hallways looped endlessly, taking explorers back to the same spot again and again. Others swore the house shifted, changing shape when no one looked, swallowing them into deeper corridors they had never seen before. Tourists who visited claimed to feel watched. One woman fainted in the seance room after hearing her own name whispered from the dark. A man fled the house screaming after he saw a cowboy in a wide-brimmed hat step out of the shadows, half his skull missing. And many reported seeing a woman in black drifting silently through the halls, the figure of Sarah Winchester herself, still trapped within the home she built for the dead. To this day, the mansion stands in San Jose. Known as the Winchester Mystery House, its 160 rooms remain, a maze of madness and mourning. Thousands visit each year, walking the halls where Sarah once wandered, searching for the spirits that drove her to madness. And those who have gone at night say the same thing. The house breathes, the walls whisper, the footsteps follow you. And if you're quiet enough, in the dead silence of midnight, you will hear the faint ringing of a bell, calling the dead to gather, calling Sarah to return. Because the house she built was never for the living. It was, and always will be, a home for the dead.